Alright, so I think it's a good idea to start talking about my writing for once. So, some of the well-known Wattpad books I've written are The Adaptive Game, Lustfront, Adaptive Professionals, and Precinct 9089. I'll be answering some of your questions about these books too, so how about we get started? The Walking Hero is the first ever series that got popular. Those who remember what the hell that was, you probably also know its downfall. The Walking Hero is about the protagonist, Tiega. He is a humble, normal guy trying to survive, but soon he uncovers details about the beginning of the outbreak. A lot of the characters are in this series because of the amount of popularity this story got. Most, it was only close friends that I added in as characters, but then it became everyone. It was really tough choosing which characters to kill off because some people were really hoping to survive them. Now, the writing isn't that good, and most of the dialogue is tasteless. I'm glad I was able to have more detail and engagement with most of my recent writings, because I couldn't have gotten here with what shit I wrote back then. LMAO. The first book had ended pretty quick, but there was a new player who would take over, Candy or Candy Lover Lol. Hence, we got the name The Walking Candy. This series went so much better because I was able to limit my characters and have more room to do what I want, instead of just listening to one idea which was not good. I'm looking to rewrite The Walking Hero and The Walking Candy, but I've got other stuff for now. The adaptive game followed a similar formula as The Walking Hero. The Walking Hero was based off of The Walking Dead, duh, and the adaptive game was based off of Squid Game. The Walking Hero included pandemic members, and the adaptive game included UEPS members. It was very welcome to new characters, just like The Walking Hero did. However, this time I had better writing, but less of a space to work with. So, let me kind of explain the problem. The Walking Hero takes concepts from a lot of zombie media. Zombie media is everywhere, not just the Walking Dead series, like Night of the Living Dead, Shaun of the Dead, World War Z, and that's just counting movies. The adaptive game was very hard to make up ideas for. The adaptive game always goes by the typical death game standard. There are only a few death games that you can remember though, like The Hunger Games, Jigsaw, Alice in Borderlands, The Maze Runner. The worst part was making games that were not just physical. It's in the title, the winners are always adaptive. The adaptive game had its own games for the most part that were definitely not perfect. Oh yeah, and the ending. I forgot about the ending. I don't know what would make a good ending game except for a physical challenge, of course. About 6 people were left, and the concept was based off of Decaying Winter. Yeah, it didn't work. It was horrible. The fighting part, the abilities, they were fine, but for someone who doesn't play Decaying Winter, it would be very hard to explain the rules. I need to be simple, so I had to be more simple. So I moved on to adaptive professionals. The ending of the adaptive game left lots of room for a sequel. There were 3 remaining survivors and new characters, and that meant more development. Adaptive professionals had very little planning. That was the problem. I was able to make characters matter more by removing the max players altogether from 690 to 49. The little groups that you were sorted into had a meaning behind it, and the best part is that each person was also associated with one of the 7 deadly sins. The meaning was pretty deep for my readers to understand, apparently, because the purpose was to make everybody eventually suffer from one of the mistakes they made, which also associated with the sin they had. Wow. Connor killed Corn to get him out of the way. Simple form of envy is when someone else has something you don't want them to have. Amelia might have seemed like a slut to you, but it's really an example of too much pride. A person who doesn't have boundaries, has too much confidence, leads to going into scenarios unprepared. Greed comes down to Sean. He has the most cards and he doesn't wait to get more. He'll only do something if he gets something out of it, and that's the smart way to go. Now, wrath is a form of hate that doesn't wash itself away. I have a lot of wrath inside of me too, but this was attributed with Jax. Now, people didn't seem to like adaptive professionals as much because of the maturity of it. I don't like to say it, but you know what I'm talking about. I wrote for a much more complicated reason, which is a good thing in a couple of ways. The games were more creative, the story had a better moral behind it, but it also lost a lot of its magic from the first book. Now, in my opinion, the second book was a lot better. I did better of what I was striving to improve. And the third part of the sequel, well, I'm still thinking about it. We'll see where that goes. So, Lust Front. Oh boy, I'm surprised I even managed to finish this. Lust Front was a lot of fun to write because it was a great premise in a great setting with a great goal. It was a realistic topic that could be related to finding the perfect girl. Now, it was my first time writing a romance, but it just seemed like a pretty funny story in general. Connor is looking for a girlfriend, and all of the girls he meets are very, very different. They're all nice to him, but none of them appeal to him that much. His wingwoman Amelia is the only person he can turn to for advice, but he really finds out that the real perfect partner is the person that needs you, not the person that you think you need. You will meet your soulmate, but you can't work too hard for it. You have to remember that there's someone who needs you, and chasing after a meaningless pursuit of finding a perfect girl is counterintuitive. Cause hey, you shouldn't live your life like nobody is looking out for you. In the end, Lust Front was quite successful. It wasn't actually stupid. It was reasonable, and I am still proud of it in the end. For once, I didn't write something obsessed with guns or trying to survive something. A nice, relatable topic that could hurt nobody. Epic. So, what the hell is shell shock, you might ask? What is conflict license? The thing people have to accept about writing is that it's not a chore, so just like art, it can't be mass-produced during the Great Depression. You should never force yourself to create something just for the sake of getting it out, because writing and drawing isn't something that requires physical ability. It needs expression that comes from creative ability. I tried to go into Shell Shock with a fresh slate, a story about military and PTSD, but hell, it screwed up. I had no idea what to write in it without experience. People had been asking for action, not something boring, a romance of all things. Shell Shock might be a more interesting topic compared to Lust Front, but it was also much harder to write. I gave up very fast because making ideas for it would be much harder than you think. Shell Shock was in a military setting, and all of the characters were still UPS members. Nothing really changed, and I didn't actually know much about the function of the military and stuff. You should know exactly why I dropped it now. Conflict License came after The Walking Hero. It had a similar premise to 9089. It was based off of Pandemic, but nobody was reading it. And a lot of it was copied from Entry Point, I'm not going to lie. Now, Entry Point is all about revenge, blah blah blah. Entry Point is far too simple because it's just limited to a Roblox game that will have a very young player base. Trust me, Shishato would have made a much more complicated story in Entry Point if she could have fit it all into one game. At least the lore reveals a little more about the behind the scenes, but too bad Entry Point is dead. So, if I really wanted to deliver some good moral about the concept of revenge, some more about my failures in Pandemic, then I had to ditch Conflict License and work on something more complicated. Make a clean slate and start from the beginning. Luckily, some assholes gave the story some new ideas. I turned a bunch of story about a bunch of Discord drama into a story about crime, and it's working. Yup, it's Precinct 9089, folks. So, let's talk about it. Precinct 9089 is different from Conflict License in a few ways. Conflict License is about the main character fighting on the rightful side, setting off to kill the bad guys. But that's too average. That's literally entry point. I had to go deeper. What if I made it clear that everyone was a bad guy? That's a tale of two evils. That's a realistic way to put it, because nobody is ever innocent. It made more sense to write about that, because all this time I've been looking to write a story about my revenge on Pandemic, completely fictional. Like I reenacted everything in a criminal world. Stories of corruption, betrayal, and grief. But once even bigger tempests hit me, when I was hit with more suffering, I realized Pandemic wasn't my only problem. I was against the world, and if I wanted to make that clear in Precinct 9089, I had to include everyone involved. Now, everyone tells me to move on, some blame me of everything and put me down. I always get up. I keep getting up. I'm the only person who won't move on, and I'm the reason I still fight. If I leave it like that and disappear without a trace forever, it'll just mean I made no difference. I needed something to happen. Something needed to happen for something to matter. That's why Precinct 9089 was going to do the job. The perspective in 9089 always changes, and this time for good reason. From the 4 factions that are against each other, they all see the others as the bad. But really, it's 4 bad factions that want each other's head, and claim they are the good guys. In today's corrupt world, everyone just cares about their own interests. The plot isn't a darn man video concept for once. I think everyone already knows I don't really like happy endings because I don't think there are any happy endings in life. That's how it always is. That's what it's all about, and if everything goes well, it should be a good moral that everyone can understand. It's realistic, and hopefully, you can even learn something. So yeah, I really recommend, if you haven't already, try reading 1 or 2 of my stories, or even all, because it really means a lot to me. It might seem pretty simple to you, and I can assume that a lot of you don't like reading, but it's going to help me a lot. Just please leave feedback, because it helps me write better stuff, and, you know, like, if you're already reading it, I just really want to thank you. And if you have any more questions, comments, just add it down below in the description. I'm happy to read it. Thank you so much for making it this far.